Take a
Okay,
couple of notes up here.
we are recording with the one and only, my buddy, my pal, Mr. Roger Williams, author of my favorite book, The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, the link to which is in the description on Sunday, July 9th, 2023 at 4:07 p.m. Eastern Time. Last night I was talking about I'm scheduling you for a show next week, and a week from today is the 78th anniversary of the atomic bomb. And Drew Bob said, I love how that's in your calendar. And it's not in my calendar. I just know the date, July 16th. So I don't know which one's better or which one's worse. The fact that I know it like the back of my hand or whatever. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
It's a
We
kind of important date.
It really is, though. July 16th, 19, it absolutely, it truly is. They the world changed forever.
Hmm.
But we are going to talk about someone who you said, you go, it's very important in terms of free speech is Marquis Sade. So I said, originally
He,
I said, no, I don't want to. And Roger came back yesterday and said, I think you need to take another look at it. And you know what? If I'm going to constantly pride myself on keeping an open mind and hearing things, then, I got to practice what I preach. So with that, I'm going to shut the fuck up, Mr. Roger Williams.
yeah. Donation Alphonse Francois de Sade, the Marquis de
Mhm.
Sade.
That
Uh,
was smooth.
say he changed the world himself in ways that most people do not appreciate. And uh, he is definitely not a good guy. I'm going to say that up front.
Sure.
Okay. He was a very unsavory person, but there's caveats there. Uh, he was born on June 2nd, 1740, and died in 1814. So he lived to be 74. Uh, during that time, his childhood was apparently pretty crappy. His parents were of the aristocratic noble class. He was basically raised by servants. He didn't like any of the people who were responsible for him when he was a child, and this created a bad attitude that persisted for his entire life. Uh, he went on to a military academy. Most people don't know this about him, but he served in the French military for 14 years. He actually saw combat in the 7 Years' War. So violence and death were things that were not theoretical to this man. He actually lived uh, the things that he would eventually write about. Uh, where it started to go off the rails, apparently, I think it was probably while he was in the military. He got this idea. He was a minor noble. Okay, so he was of the nobility. His family had a castle, although he lost it during his life. He lost his fortune and had to sell the castle. Um, but there was a certain amount of cachet there, uh, but not very much. He ended up marrying up, but not by choice. It was an arranged marriage. Uh, the woman he ended up marrying was 22 years old when Sade was like in his 30s. Uh, he really wanted to marry this woman's sister, who was 13 at the time.
Ooh,
But the father-in-law said nope. Uh, and it was, so it went down. Uh, he did maintain a lifelong contact with the sister and ended up fleeing France with her at one point later in life, uh, when she was not underage anymore. Of course, the whole concept of being underage, we have to remember, is not a thing that existed
yeah,
in
yeah,
18th century France.
yeah.
So this is a thing. A lot of what is very shocking about Sade's activities and his writings are things that actually wouldn't have been that shocking when he wrote them and when he did them. Uh, so uh,
Fair enough.
particularly his fascination with young adolescent kids, what we would call kids today. Now, I don't think Sade was a pedophile the way that we think of that today, because he doesn't seem to have had an interest in prepubescent kids. What he was interested in was people who were flowering into their ability to experience intense sexual feelings.
That is that hebephile. I know there's like actually I literally saw this like 2 days ago. There's like three gradations, I guess, of pedophilia. A pedophile is
I
a
think you're right.
prepubescent.
Yes.
Hebephile is, I think, the second one, and it's during puberty, and then there's one more,
Yeah.
and it's after
But
puberty, before 18.
with Sade, he actually had a rationale for it, which is an interesting thing. Uh, I want to go over a little bit of his life. I don't want to go into
It,
detail on his life first,
and real
but
quick, also just to clarify for everyone listening, Roger did say he's a bad guy, and I would also like to
yes,
say he's a bad. We're examining this as a person that lived
he's
and why he did. You have to know why Hitler did shit. It doesn't make it good. You got to
exactly.
understand it. So
It's
I
he
don't want
had
anyone to
it.
think we're rationalizing this or breaking it down in a way that's like, well, here's
No,
why. Or no,
the
it's not
conclusion
good.
to this is going to be how this man had a very outsized effect on modern society, even though
Gotcha,
most people don't realize it.
gotcha.
Okay, so if you like, if you look at the Wikipedia article, there are about a half a dozen really terrible stories about things that he allegedly did. And you know, the thing about it though is that when you look at anything about this man, you have to realize you're looking at it through a 200-year-long game of telephone, mostly conducted by people who didn't like him very much. So there's that. And there's the fact that he deliberately cultivated this uh, image of himself as a bad guy. He wanted to be infamous because that was his plan, to become famous and remembered, was to be infamous, to
All right,
be a bad person, to be someone so terrible that no one would forget him. It was a deliberate strategy on his part. And it obviously worked because we're talking about him in 2023.
fair
Uh,
enough.
so, uh, but so several of these stories are basically he contracted with a prostitute or took a woman home and asked for something that she didn't want, which was often anal sex. He really seemed to be interested in anal sex. And he didn't take no for an answer. So there are stories that he tied women up, locked them in rooms, kept them for a day or two, whatever, did what he wanted. But he never actually killed anybody. You know, if you compare him to somebody like Gil de Rais, who was 300 years before him, Gil de Rais, 1400 to 1440, died of being executed for the crime of killing hundreds of kids, prepubescent kids in his case. He actually was a pedophile.
Yeah,
And that was, but he was an outlier. There weren't a lot of people like that in those days. Colin Wilson goes over this pretty extensively in the. I didn't have a chance to gather any
you're
of the
good.
damn books because I just got back from the theater.
You're good.
Uh, but you have a gap between Gil de Rais and Jack the Ripper as
Okay.
far as sex criminals. And Sade was sort of a pretender. You know, the worst he did really would be considered like heavy BDSM gone wrong without consent. He never did anything that would actually like permanently harm the person that he was doing. He just didn't care whether you wanted it done or not. And that so that was, which is bad. All
Yeah,
right, which is very bad. But it's not as bad as stalking you from the beginning with the idea that, well, I'm going to do what I want with this woman and then kill her.
yeah,
He doesn't seem to have ever had that kind of motivation. And there are fictional depictions of him that portray him like that, as if he's like Jack the Ripper or something. And I kind of consider those libelous.
okay.
That because he didn't seem to be that kind of guy. He was bad, but he, most of what he did as far as we can tell, remember, 200-year game of telephone. Who knows what the fuck happened? The worst is bad case of domestic violence. Okay, get a restraining order, that sort of thing. A good illustrative episode of this, when he was in his 40s, I think. There was one of the things that comes up. The first description of the incident that I saw said that he and his wife, remember the wife that he didn't want to marry because he preferred the sister and all that. The wife was complicit in a lot of his alleged crimes. The two of them allegedly abducted 6 teenagers, 5 girls and a boy, aged 14 through 16, and kept them for 6 weeks at their manor and subjected them to all sorts of debauchery. Now, when I read that, my initial reaction was this did not pass the smell test. Because how does a middle-aged couple with maybe 1 or 2 servants, because Sade did not have a big fortune. So he did not have like an army of people working for him like a Bond villain. Abduct 6 healthy teenagers and
Yeah.
hold them prisoner for 6 weeks if
Devil's
they don't want
advocate,
to be there.
do one at a time.
Well, I finally found another account which said basically that it was more like a party. They were invited, and each
Okay.
night they would have sexual tableaus, and they would sort of have a little teach-in about all of the cool shit that you can do with your body and all. And the kids obviously wanted to be there. That's why they were there. Now, when the parents got wind of what was happening, they tweaked the story probably to tweak the reputations of the kiddos so they wouldn't be perceived as perverts when they went to get married or something.
Or reputations of yourself as a parent.
Exactly. So so there's a lot of shit like that that has to be filtered in with with Saad's life. No one really knows for sure exactly how it happened, but he had to have. He was apparently a very nasty person in a lot of ways. He didn't make friends very easily. In fact, this is one of the things they say about his military career was that he didn't make friends. He didn't form companionships and all. That was one of the things that was complained about with him. But he was good. He was extremely intelligent, and he did move up the ranks. It's just that nobody liked him. But on the other hand, the last 20 years of his life, he was imprisoned in a lunatic asylum. And the last 4 years of his life, he had an affair with a girl who was 14 when they started it, who was the daughter of one of the caretakers of the lunatic asylum. And this went on until his death 4 years later. Now, that suggests that this is a person who had a certain amount of charm.
Sure.
Okay, who wasn't necessarily just an absolute asshole all the time. He was able to seduce a 70-year-old man who can seduce a 14-year-old girl and then have a 4-year relationship with her.
Probably has a lot of the same podcast host traits I have. So to be
Yeah,
quite frank, he can probably
I don't
charm.
think I could pull that off. So
All right, he probably wouldn't be a half bad fucking game stream co-host
yeah, I mean, this is and
in a vacuum.
in a lot of ways, Sade literally was a troll, but he was a troll before the internet existed. He literally trolled real life society.
Okay.
Um, so that's it's not worth trying to go into too much more detail than that about his life. Let's talk
Yeah.
about what he wrote.
I was about to say, yeah,
Okay.
that and the effect on today.
Yeah. All right. So the 4 major works that most people might have heard of are Justine, Juliet, Philosophy in the Bedroom, and The 120 Days of Sodom. Now, uh, Justine and Juliet were twin books written about twin girls, literally. Okay. And because Sade liked to introduce adolescent people to their potential for pleasure, they were 12 when they were kicked out of the nunnery. Their father was disgraced, destroyed in a business deal. And when the convent discovered that there was no more money coming, they kicked them out onto the street. And so these two girls had to figure out how to make their way in the world. Juliet was the one who was wicked. She realized that she had to be willing to do anything. And she was. I've seen one reviewer describe her as a murderous oh shit. Damn. The word left my head. Woman who just loves sex with anything.
A murderous nympho.
Yes, murderous nymphomaniac.
Yeah.
Okay. And she is successful. And Justine meets her many years later when she is at the height of her power. And I've seen a reviewer say that this is one of the most pro-female books of its era, because Juliet basically walks over every man she meets,
She's a girl boss.
outthinks them, outclasses them, out, just basically makes her way.
Bad bitch
And
entrepreneur climbing the corporate ladder.
yeah. So, meanwhile, Justine is the virtuous girl. So she is portrayed as being almost, virtue is like a sexual fetish to her. And this is an interesting thing about Sade, which I'll dovetail in a minute. But so she basically gets stomped on for her entire life. Everybody that she turns to imprisons her, tortures her, rapes her, and it happens again and again and again, and she can't learn that this is not working. Because she's incapable, because for her, virtue is the highest, most pleasurable thing that she can do. To her, virtue is like a sexual fetish.
Sure.
And this is not a thing that happens in real life. Okay, this is not a way that people are, which is interesting because it suggests that Sade didn't understand masochism. Obviously, he was capable of seducing women and portraying this character that, even though he wasn't as evil as he pretended to be, he understood that it was attractive to some people. But he didn't understand that there are people who actually take pleasure in submission or having terrible things done to them. That fantasy would be, be what we know now it is. It wasn't until Leopold Sake von Massac in the late 19th century that we got that, which is why we call it sadomasochism instead of just sadism. But he did love Justine as a character. She was clearly his favorite character because he wrote her story 3 times at ever greater length and detail. So he was fascinated by her. That brings us to, okay, there are 2 more works. Philosophy in the Bedroom, which is mostly notable because it contains the full text of a pamphlet that Sade wrote. Remember pamphlets?
I was about to say, yeah.
That pamphlet is yet another effort, Frenchmen, if we would become Republicans. He published it right after the French Revolution. And as far as I am concerned, it is one of the most uh, brilliant works of satire ever printed. Uh, it starts off with the suggestion that state religions are not a good idea, which was a very reasonable thing to argue in the wake of the French Revolution.
Yeah.
But it progresses from there to suggesting that ever more severe things should probably not be illegal,
Ah.
and finally culminating in rape and murder, and concluding that there shouldn't be any laws at all. And it's really just it's actually one of the few works of it. It's not gross. A
I was gonna
lot of his
I was
stuff is very gross.
I was gonna say, in man, if it's if you're gonna do it, man, the wake of the French Revolution is the time to do it.
Oh yeah.
If
Oh
there's a shakeup of rules after the Reign of Terror, man, there's a time
yeah.
to guillotines were flying, anything good. That was a time to really, when you're spitballing ideas, that's the time to, it's like
So
when
yeah.
the CEO is like, who's got a wild idea? That's the time to pull out the shit that you've been working on. You're like, I've got this idea.
Uh, and it worked because
Yeah.
they made him a judge for a few years.
Strike while the iron's hot.
I mean, the enemy of my enemy. It's like he was clearly the enemy of the monarchy.
Yeah.
He was in the Bastille. So
Okay. He's got street cred.
yeah, so they gave him a lot of rope, and he finally exhausted that. But they didn't objectively jail him for what he wrote. They jailed him. They put him in a mental institution for just being nuts,
Okay.
because that's better,
All
I
right.
think. Uh, and his wife, all right, sued for divorce when he was 40. Was when he started ending up being in jail all the time. So he spent most of the latter half of his life in jail, uh, for this, that, and the other thing, because he was unrepentant. He believed in his philosophy, and he believed that you should be able to express yourself, that that was your duty as a living being. And he knew that this was not necessarily going to work out well for you as an individual. Colin Wilson has pointed out that Sade's novels are littered with the bodies of his libertines. So he knew that you were putting yourself in opposition to society and to everybody else. But on the other hand, this was your duty, because of the way that he put it. And actually, his argument, Sade professed to be an atheist, but his argument is actually much more devastating if you're religious. Is that if something created you, and Sade's version of this was he lived in the 18th century. They didn't have ideas like evolution and chaos theory that could explain how the world might end up looking the way it does without an intelligent designer. So Sade had to kind of grudgingly admit that there was some kind of creative force at work that made the world look the way that it does. But he clearly did not believe that it was the Christian God, this guy with the white beard and sitting in a chair and telling everyone what they can and can't do. His theory was, if the thing that created you put an impulse into you, it gave you a feeling. It said, put your dick in something or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
To not do that was an affront to your creator. You are resisting what you are supposed to be. That philosophy and the way that it does is called egoism. And it's called that because we use the word sadism for something else.
Okay.
Uh, but that was basically Sade's non-sexual philosophy of life. But he understood another thing, which is that it's not universalizable. He understood that if everybody acted like that, that the world would fall apart. And that if you act like that, you are setting yourself up against the world. But he thought it's your duty to do that as a living being. because otherwise you're an affront to to your creative force, whatever made you. That was his philosophy, and he lived it. I mean, he spent half his life in jail because he lived it. So, uh, so anyway, getting back to his major works, yet another effort was embedded in Philosophy in the Bedroom, which is basically a fucking suck tale of a 12-year-old girl being educated in the arts of sex after being denied by her mother, who was kind of puritanical. Uh, and the essay, which is the best part of the book, is sort of embedded in there. Basically, one of the characters reads it to her. Uh, and it's not super gross until the very end when the mother shows up to rescue her child and gets accosted by the libertines instead, and what they do to her is pretty gross. Uh, but that's the other thing. And then, of course, there is the 120 Days of Sodom. Now, Sade wrote the 120 Days while he was imprisoned in the Bastille,
Mm-hmm.
and he had to hide the manuscript. He basically glued the pages together in a continuous roll and wound it up like a giant roll of toilet paper, and he had it hidden behind a stone in his cell. In those days, being in jail meant, you could have, it's like if you were a noble, you might actually have a desk and appointments, and if you could afford them, nice food and be things brought to you. You just couldn't leave, just in case they might decide to drag you out and kill you one night, because that's
Yeah.
the way it worked. The French really did that. That was
Yeah.
they didn't give you a date when you're going to be executed. They thought it was more humane to drag you out at random in the middle of the night and take you to the guillotine when you didn't expect it, because then you wouldn't be like suffering this countdown type thing.
I feel like that's so much worse than not knowing.
So yeah, but that was their theory of it, of how to do that. So on July 4th, uh, they moved him from the Bastille to a lunatic asylum, uh, naked as a worm, as he later complained. They came in the middle of the night, dragged him out. Instead of taking him to the guillotine, they took him to a different prison, to a mental hospital. Then 10 days later, the Bastille was stormed, and he had been there for 4 years, and he had written this manuscript. He was devastated that he lost it. He thought it was gone forever, and it was one of the great, disappointments of his life that he lost the manuscript to the 120 days. Uh, but the manuscript was recovered by one of the people who stormed the Bastille, and it ended up in the hands of a Belgian collector somehow. No one really knows exactly how. Uh, and in the 20th century, the French government and a couple of the museums decided that it would really probably be a good idea to repatriate this artifact that was kind of an important part of French history. Whether you liked it or not, it's there. And they ended up paying about $7 million for the original manuscript of the 120 Days of Sodom, rolled up
Wow.
like a ball of toilet paper. Okay. Which makes it one of the most valuable holographic manuscripts ever sold at auction,
What's holographic mean?
written by
What is it
hand.
written? No. It's gotta be up
And
there
it,
with what's the one Bill Gates has? The Codex.
yeah. In the case of the 120 Days of Sodom, written in teeny tiny little letters, with the journalist who wrote the article I got that story from actually got access, and the curator of the museum brought him the original manuscript and allowed him to inspect it. And he said Sade must have had incredibly good vision
Yeah.
because it was like, he had to use a magnifying glass to read it.
Oh
And
wow.
the curator, the guy who was responsible for taking care of the manuscript, warned him, you can't read more than 5 or 6 pages of this without like getting violently ill.
Jesus.
Um, Now, what most people don't know about the 120 days, actually, this translation here, which I bought in the 1980s, includes Justine, Philosophy in the Bedroom, and other writings, one of which is the 120 Days of Sodom. It notably does not include Juliet,
Hmm.
which is strange.
Odd. Yeah.
Um, but the 120 Days of Sodom, only the first 30 days were actually written out in full length like a novel. Sade wrote the rest of it as an outline with notes. It's like, well, this is what will happen. This is what will happen to this person, stuff like that. He didn't actually write a full text. And it's in 4 sections of progressively worse debauchery, where the final section is pleasures that result in the death of one of the participants. Uh, but only the first quarter of the book was actually written by Sade. So most of the rest of it has been imagined by other people,
Wait, say that
which,
again.
well, it's 120 days. Sade only wrote the first 30 days at full length, like a novel. The rest of it was an outline.
Hmm.
So if you've seen anything based on it, such as the movie Salo, uh, that was all imagined by other people who came after him because
Okay.
he never had a chance to flesh it
I
out and
think I've
complete it.
read. I think I've read about that. I'm hesitant to type
Yeah.
it in.
Well, Salo gets us to another thing, and
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think I've read of that before. Yeah.
yeah, it is probably if you are aware of anything that Sade wrote at all as a modern person, it's probably 120 Days of Sodom because of the movie Salo. Now, this brings me to what happened to Sade's ideas and his legacy. Uh, After he died in 1814, he was largely forgotten. Everybody breathed a deep sigh of relief that he was not a thorn in their ass anymore and tried to pretend he had never existed, except for the Americans, because I think he is the reason we have a First Amendment. I think he is the reason the First Amendment reads the way that it does, because France was our biggest ally in the
Mhm.
Revolutionary
Yeah.
War, and Sade was most active in the 1780s when
You were doing the Bill of
we had a
Rights and all that.
major
Yeah.
diplomatic presence there. And in those days, you could not be active in French diplomatic circles without knowing who the fuck the Marquis de Sade was.
Yeah.
He made sure of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, our founding fathers knew exactly what they were doing when they wrote the First Amendment the way that they did. Um, but he was largely forgotten for the first half of the 19th century. And he was rediscovered because of another phenomenon that we've talked about, which was the Victorian sex novel.
Hmm.
When they passed the Indecency Act and everyone suddenly started wanting these novels, and the technology was there to create them without having too much of a risk of being raided. The publishers were looking for inspiration. The writers were looking for inspiration. The publishers were looking for material. This is when a lot of his stuff got translated into English. And the literati, the academics started paying some attention to him again because this was like unique. And that was the period that I talked to you about in the history of porn thing, where if you weren't conversant with Sade's ideas. You were considered kind of a bumpkin in certain academic circles because you weren't expected to agree with him. Nobody would admit to agreeing with him about anything, but his arguments, which were actually very persuasive in terms of what was known about science and medicine and psychology in the 18th and 19th centuries, that you had to kind of figure out why these are not persuasive. Why, what's wrong with this? Okay. Um, of course, today we know he was wrong about almost everything because he didn't know about a lot of things that we now know about how the brain and the body work. But 18th century, right? At the time, this was very persuasive. And what's put a break on that was World War One,
Okay.
or the Great War. Everyone got distracted by the fact that everyone was fighting everybody else. And that, basically you didn't have people sitting around in cafes arguing about what the Marquis de Sade wrote when the Germans are shooting at you.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, and that sort of continued during the interwar years because everyone was really nervous and no one believed it was really over. And then World War II happened, which was everyone expected really at the time. It was after World War II, particularly with the liberation of the death camps, that a lot of people sat up and went, this Marquis de Sade guy might have been way the fuck ahead of his time. Because the Germans didn't just write about it, they actually did all this shit for reals.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that reignited an interest in his work that again and again, because his work is very gross, he has a number of obsessions. Like, he has an obsession with shit that is
Yeah.
just okay, totally off-putting.
For everybody listening, that was actually like one of the early births of this potential show. It was like a month ago. I was just like, anyone that watches the video game stream knows that it's basically like me developing Tourette's. And I would just like yell at Craig and I'd be like, Craig, I'm gonna fucking shit on you. And I would just keep talking about it. And finally Roger was like, you sound like Marquis de Sade. And I was like, no, I just want to shit on Craig. And he was like, well, you know, it's a shoe
That
fit.
was,
Just
yeah,
literally just started screaming. Yeah.
so yeah, he had an obsession with that. That was part of his kink. Uh, and in the 50s, uh, well, there was a guy named Jean-Paul Hahn who was a critic, literary writer, uh, publisher in French literary circles. Uh, he was born in the 1890s, so he lived through the whole Great War,
Mm-hmm.
mid-war, World War II era. And he had a mistress. He had a wife, but he also had a mistress because these are French people. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So his mistress was Anne Desclose. She was born around 1907, I think. Uh, so yeah, a lot younger than him. But they had like a 30-year affair. And they were both active in the French resistance. So they lived through World War II with the reality that they could be captured and imprisoned and tortured and executed. This was a reality for them. This wasn't a fantasy. Um, and after the war, Paul Hahn was one of the people who pointed out this Marquis de Sade guy. You know, he we need to pay attention to him because we just saw a bunch of shit that he talked about turn real. And maybe we ought to look at the rest of what he wrote, just be ready and so on. So that was his thing, is that he was a big uh, critic. He wrote a number of it. In fact, he wrote
Excuse me.
a preface in this book,
Okay.
the translations of all these things. He wrote so now It gets better. All right. So I know I've told you that I did the little exercise that Tony Robbins suggests to find out what your motivational word is. Okay. That everybody there's a word. If somebody says it, it will set you in motion. And you whatever. Well, in my case, it's impossible.
Hmm.
If someone tells me something is impossible, I will move heaven and earth to
I
see if I can make it
I
happen.
vividly remember in August 2010, fresh off a year of partying and drinking as a frat boy, going to the student advisor at Valdosta State and me saying, "What do I need to do to become a doctor with my existing shitty GPA?" And she's like, "Well, first things is," she goes, "you should maybe consider being like, I don't know, like a, I don't know, like a nurse assistant." She's like, "Because that's a pretty hefty goal." And I just remember looking and like taking it personally, even though she was
Hmm.
just doing her job. I just remember thinking, I'm going to get into medical school and I'm going to beat this woman to death with my acceptance letter. No, yeah, no. So I know what you're talking. Just the whole, you can't do that. It's like, oh, you
Yeah.
fucking cut.
All
Even
right.
if it's said with the best of intentions. Yeah,
All right. So I'm not the only one.
yeah,
So Jean-Paul Hahn, one day in the early 1950s, tells his mistress, no woman could ever write a story such as the Marquis de Sade wrote. So she went home and rolled up her sleeves and started writing,
yeah.
and ended up writing a little book called Story of O. And Paul Hahn got this. She sent it to him as a series of letters, and he put it together, and he was like, "This is fucking brilliant. You've proven me that I was wrong. You've proven that a woman can actually write a story like this that has got all of these elements. It has to be published." And she was like, "You can do whatever you want with it. It's a gift. You just can't put my name on it." So it was published under the pseudonym Pauline Rayage with a breathless introduction by Jean-Paul Hahn, in which he claimed not to know who wrote it, even though he was sleeping with her every week.
Fair enough.
And Disclose finally, yeah, and there was a huge controversy. This is like one of the most infamous pornographic books of the 20th century. And there was a huge controversy about who wrote it. A lot of people thought Jean-Paul Hahn wrote it himself, although he was like, no, look at these details. This had to have been written by a woman. This is like, but it also has all of these Sadean elements to it. Desclose finally came clean in 1994 at the age of 87,
Hell yeah.
40 years after it was published.
Mm.
um, Now, how the world has changed. Okay. How did I get into this weirdness? Okay. In 1980, I was 16 years old, and I was in a special program called COPAHS, COPAHS, and I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it was this program for gifted high school students to take college courses in the summer between our junior and senior year in high school. So I was taking the Introduction to Computer Science and Philosophy 1000. And so I was, and in the summer session, those courses are every day.
Yeah.
So I was there every day at
Yeah.
the
I took
UNO,
OChem 2 over summer. Yeah.
yeah, at the UNO campus. And so one day I was there just hanging out between my classes, and I was in the bookstore, the university bookstore, the University of New Orleans bookstore. Okay. I'm 16 years old. And there is a shelf of novels that are notable that you might be assigned or something. All right. And I noticed this book. It was just a normal paperback. Yeah, not a trade paperback that's like 5x9, but just a regular paperback. And it has a completely white spine with the title of the book in black. No artwork. It's like I've never seen this before. And so I pull it out And the cover of the book is white. There's nothing but the title of the book in a box and the name of the author. Story of O by Pauline Rayage. I had no idea what the fuck it was.
Hmm.
So I opened it because it was not in plastic or anything and went, oh my God.
Yeah.
Now, I'm 16 years old and I'm thinking there is no way that this university is going to sell me this book. But I'm me.
Yeah.
$4 later, I'm walking out the front of the bookstore with it and trying to figure out where the fuck I'm going to hide it.
Yeah.
And my father is going to watch this podcast and find it really interesting because I don't think he knows about
There are
this.
so many stories my parents have found out about my childhood through this podcast. It's so
And
you're being further initiated into the podcast, Roger.
and interestingly enough,
Ah,
you
all
might
right,
notice an
all right,
influence
all right, all right.
because there was
It's your nod of the
okay,
head. All right, touche.
yeah. So it was uh because I have always felt I think I've well, I know that I've told you that I feel like you learn more about something that you want to study if you study it when it is broken or misbehaving.
Uh-huh.
So if you want to know how humans work, how intelligence works, how anything about it works, you can watch it functioning smoothly all day long and
Yeah.
it'll just you won't learn anything. It's like if you plucked a caveman out of history and put him next to an interstate highway and he's watching all these cars go by, he would have no idea how they work,
Yeah.
what's making them go. But if he sees one going out, belching out steam and smoke,
Yeah.
then oh, fire has to have something to do with that.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about systems from edge cases.
You learn more on how to operate the podcast when the software is fucking up. You go, why is this happening?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you learn out all about fucking bit rates and streaming. But you don't learn it when it's smooth.
Yeah, because you don't have to.
Yeah, correct.
And there's also no evidence. Because everything is smooth,
Just
it's
yeah.
concealed from you,
Yeah.
but deliberately. But it's when things go wrong, and I put wrong in air quotes there as far as human beings, because we obviously have, we did the whole sexual deviances thing. Uh, and there's obviously a range that happens to us. Uh, it's when it's not normal that you get some clues about how it happens in the first place. And I am the most boringly cisgender white guy you will ever meet. So, for me, this was fascinating
Yeah.
that, it's like, this is like, and because even then I was interested in the idea of creating something like artificial intelligence, uh, but no one knew how it worked or how to do it. And I was looking at this and going, these are clues.
Yeah.
This is like, if you create an artificial intelligence and it's not capable of becoming Gilda Ray, or it's not capable of becoming Donnie Sade, or it's not capable of becoming Adolf Hitler, then it ain't there. It ain't right.
Then it ain't human.
Exactly. So, those are edge cases that show.
That illuminate that's how you find the boundaries of the board game of operation. You gotta
Right.
find that you gotta find the edges to
And I think
determine the system.
that is the importance of Sade. So,
All right.
uh, so in the 50s, Story of O was published. There was this big flurry of interest in Sade, his writings, and in the whole subject, which gradually died down during the 60s. But at the same time, Masters and Johnson were doing their sex studies. And one of the interesting things that happened there was they found a really surprisingly large minority of their subjects were homosexual. And it was one of those things where, and I had a huge argument the other day with someone about this. It's like, are you, because I just happened to drop in, it's like, well, it's like somewhere between 10 and 20%, probably around 15% of the population is gay. And this guy who was, I live in Mandeville, so it's a really Republican place. And he was like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Where do you get that? It's like, there's not that many gay people. It's like, uh, ask Bill Masters and Virginia Johnson, because that was the figure they got. Because yes, if you hand out questionnaires and
Yeah.
ask people to mark them up, then they're strongly motivated to lie
Yeah. Like,
about something that's that embarrassing and dangerous. But if you gain their trust, you're, doing these other uh things, they're taking off their clothes for you and doing all this. They will learn that they can trust you with the stuff that is embarrassing or dangerous. And that was what they found, is that, especially if you consider bisexual, it's at least 10%. That, probably closer to 20 if you consider bi. And in fact, they did 4 studies, Masters and Johnson, and they found so many gay people in their test pool that their last study was entirely about homosexuals and their sex practices and what they were doing, because there were so many of them in their other 3 studies that they had already done. Now that brings us into the 1980s, and there's an interesting bifurcation that happens there. Uh, because in the 70s, you had the free love type stuff and, the whole hippies and stuff, stuff like that. And then in 1980, we elected Reagan, and the whole government swerved hard to the right. But in academia, you had a big flurry of interest in other things than, in particularly in exotic sexuality. So Masters and Johnson did their gay study. In fact, this is when, it's like now there is an actual section of the bookstore called Gay and Lesbian Studies.
yeah. Oh, really?
Yes, there is. I'm seriously, there is a section in Barnes and Noble. There's an entire bookshelf with a sign over it that says Gay and Lesbian Studies. Uh, which obviously did not exist in the 1970s.
Sure.
The and the success that they had looking into this, the first tier of weirdness, encouraged other people to start looking into other aspects of weirdness. So you had Thomas Weisman in 1983 published an anthology called S&M, Studies in Dominance and Submission, which is an anthology of monographs about S&M. And that was where I discovered Pat Califia, which is a person I know that I've told you about before. But that was people starting to say, well, these are people who exist. They do these things. Why? How did they get into it? And no one really knew. It was a mystery. It was just like everybody before that was just like, well, it's perversity. It's the devil. It's whatever. And, this was the first time scientists actually started looking at it and asking, well, what makes people this way? And that brought us all the way full circle back to Sade. What made Sade Sade? Well, obviously he was a pervert. Okay. He had whatever it is that makes people, well, he was bisexual. He obviously had this fascination with dominance.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's interestingly, he didn't, like I said, he didn't seem to understand that there was a complementary masochistic thing
Yeah.
going on. But where did he come from? Well, he was a minor noble. And so he knew he was different. And he was being told not to express this difference, that you're not supposed to do this. But on the other, because he wasn't that high up, but he was in a position to see where all the bodies were buried.
Mm-hmm.
He was looking at the people who were higher up in the hierarchy and seeing all the shit that they got away with.
Yeah.
So, and he ended up, I like to say, I think one of the biggest motivational factors with Sade was he hated hypocrisy with the passion of 1,000 suns. Uh, that was the one thing that I think drove him, is that he understood what he was, and he was not going to deny it,
Yeah.
no matter what it cost him. And it cost him a lot. He paid, as Jean Paul Hound said in the intro to this book, Sade paid and paid and paid and paid. He spent close to 40 years in prison, mostly for the crime of writing about shit that people didn't like.
Yeah.
So, but his legacy is that today we have the whole LGBT, whatever it is, movement,
Mm-hmm.
and we have people like Pat Califia. We have a lot of studies into other sexual weirdness. We understand that sexual fetishes are a thing, and that there is a great diversity as far as how people end up expressing sexual desire. And this really wasn't understood until after World War II, when the connection was made between Sade and what the Germans had done. And the academics went, holy shit, we need to look into this.
Yeah.
Uh, and it took another 20 years beyond that before you started getting people who are willing to actually try to get studies funded and stuff to do things. Now, today it's bifurcated again. And I think one of the reasons that I got kicked off a Metafilter for not being liberal enough is I made the comment in one of the threads that obviously whatever mechanism it is that makes a person gay or straight or bi or whatever is the same mechanism that also might make one a sadomasochist or have a fetish for leather or rubber
Mm-hmm.
or something else like that. And oh my God, the gay people came out of the woodwork to whack me over the head for suggesting that they were like these perverts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you guys were the perverts 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, now you get a little respect and everyone else gets thrown under the bus.
Yeah.
So, and and I'm just looking at this just like, and I'm just like, and we're like, it's like we've spent too much work getting our, it's like, I don't care about your fucking politics. I'm trying to figure out how this works.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah. You're the reverse engineer.
Yeah, I mean that is what I do, and I'm looking at this and going, obviously it's probably the same thing that made my goose follow me around in my blue tennis shoes, because in precocial
Imprinting.
animals
Yeah.
it happens more quickly and you can tell when it happens, but in humans it happens at a more vague time. But why would it be any different? And the part of the problem is that nobody wants that to be the answer.
Yeah. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to look
Um,
deep inside. And the same thing
yeah.
with looking at like your own traumas, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's once you start to realize where your own traumas came from and your own defense mechanisms, all of a sudden you can't write off people who you don't like as he's an asshole. You start going, oh shit, he's probably dealing with some, right? It's a thing that you start to see the mechanisms of how it works, and it almost universally always forces you into a place of humility. And we
Yeah.
don't like that.
Uh, well, yeah, well, I think a lot of people are deeply disturbed by the very idea that it is possible to understand how the human mind works,
Sure.
that it might be a mechanism that could be duplicated, that,
Sure.
you know, uh, they want it to be something divine and
Yeah.
special and all. And it's like, I'm sorry, it's like, as far as I know, it's an assemblage of matter.
And it's,
Obviously, matter is capable of doing this.
yeah,
So we should be able to make an assemblage of matter that does the same thing.
and it's not all dark, man. Sure, you find out how a pedophile or a serial killer works, and there are these fringe cases. You also find out how the most philanthropic, saintly people exist. Like, why
Hmm.
would that person do that? Why would they go and just spend their life devoting it to the? Well, they're also a fringe case, and that's,
Yeah.
you can't tell me that's a bad thing to figure out how they work.
No, and it's striking that that is something Sade got so wrong. He
Hmm.
uh his idea for what motivated Justine just isn't realistic. Uh, he basically portrayed her as being motivated by something equivalent to a sexual fetish, except for virtue. And that, that is obviously very wrong. Uh, that's when you look at virtuous people, that's not how they're motivated. And when you look at people who, yeah, it's just when you look at people who willingly submit in sexual dominance games, that's not why they are doing it either. There is actually a different motivational factor there, and it wasn't understood until and in fact, I don't think anyone would have appreciated Sake von Masak if Sade hadn't come before him 100 years earlier.
Hmm.
Partly because he was a terrible writer. That is a terrible fucking book. Venus and Furs is like, it is worse than 50 Shades of Grey.
All right, fair enough.
But it is what got people understanding that there is a motivation that is complementary. And to me, that's fascinating. I mean,
Yeah,
it's basically that we can imprint on blue tennis shoes, or we can imprint on leather, or we can imprint on shiny, uh, you know, black things like latex, or we can imprint on the wrong sex, or we can imprint on an abstraction
hmm.
like dominance or submission. And one of the reasons that this is probably happening more now than it did in the deep past is that we are not raising children in our modern society the way that our ancestors did in hunter-gatherer tribal camps. We are exposing children very early to ideas of dominance and submission, of obedience, of I am in command, you must do
Yeah,
what I
sure.
say. That is not the way that a lot of native peoples raise their children. And I suspect that that is why a lot of people imprint on these abstractions that would normally not get laid down in that part of your brain if you are being raised in an agrarian community where there isn't all of this social stress. So that's another thing. It's another clue. It's another car going down the highway with smoke and steam
Yeah,
belching out of it, going, oh, that there's something going on there, that it's not just magic. No, it's not just God did it or
yeah.
something. It's no, there's reasons for it. And uh, what people don't like about it, though, is that if I'm right, the reasons are not things that can be fixed. So
They can
it's
just
ran.
be, they can be observed, and it's
Yeah.
about it.
And you have to now, and there is an extensive aside about this in the novel. uh oh shit, that's Cryptonomicon by Neil Stevens, where he goes, because Alan Turing, who was gay, is a major character, and so one of the other characters goes on a major side uh contemplation about what makes people like this. And it turns out his conclusion about things, which he depicts in the novel, is about the same as mine. And he basically says, and it turns out if you end up a pedophile because you've imprinted on little kids, you're fucked. It
Mm,
can't be fixed, and society won't tolerate you. You're screwed.
mm,
The best you can hope for is to become asexual and hope everyone will tolerate the fact that you're there. And other than that, there's no good solution.
yeah.
It can't, so it can't be stopped. It's going to happen once in a while, and once it happens, it can't be fixed. So that's not a thing people want to hear. Uh, but sometimes things like that are how it works.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to hear, if you want to say, well, we're going to kick you off of our website because you suggested that gay people are like these other perverts, you're not listening to the right message.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I mean, as I said, I am the most boringly cisgender person you will ever meet myself, but I find all this fascinating because I wonder how did I get that way?
Yeah.
And even though it's the usual result, it's not the universal result. And it could have happened differently.
Yeah.
So I, that's, that's sort of where I landed in all of this.
Yeah.
And that pretty much concludes my exposition on the Marquis de Sade and his effect on things. It's like, I think a lot of the things that have happened since the 1980s, as far as research into sexual, well, I say deviations, but gay and lesbian studies, the gender stuff in particular. But I think there's the other stuff that's lurking, that's waiting in the wings to become that next
The
generation, uh, wouldn't be discussed. We wouldn't be talking about gay people as if gay marriage was a normal thing if it wasn't for things that happened right after World War II, with these academics looking at the writings of Sade and going, why did people do these other crazy things? And why do people do any crazy things? Why are people compelled to do things? And I think it forced us to look at how these things happen and whether they should be tolerated, uh, because otherwise you're throwing away 10 or 20% of your population and just saying that they there's what are you going to do, kill them?
to not examine it
Because
doesn't.
that's exactly what the Germans did.
Well, yeah. Well, I was gonna say to not examine it, it doesn't make it go away.
Yeah. And a number of people have pointed out that the Germans might have made out a lot better in the war if, instead of making death camps, they had just put those people to use in more normal
Probably they
circumstances,
probably would have fucking won.
doing jobs, building weapons and stuff like that. And they would have probably been willing, if you're not torturing them to death
Yeah,
in,
put them in a
in the
artillery
meantime.
shell
But
manufacturing plant.
uh, yeah, but it was like Richard Rhodes said, though, it wasn't about anything
It wasn't
efficient.
rational. It
No,
was
it was about the
diverting.
Sade. It
Yeah,
was sadistic.
it was diverting resources to the death camps even when they were losing a two front war. It was right. The
Yeah,
reconnaissance photos of like they're still sending trains to Dachau despite the fact that both fronts are collapsing. It's like why aren't you why aren't you going to the war effort? And you go, oh, this is beyond rationale.
no, yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that is one of the things that, it was a collision after World War II between people remembering Sade and people observing what the Germans did and realizing that Sade might not have been that fucking crazy after all.
Yeah.
He was onto something about how people tick, and maybe we should pay attention to it. So that has been my read on the man. You know, and again, going back to it, it's like Sade was not a nice guy. Everyone pretty much agrees on that. He was a rake. He loved the company of prostitutes. He loved having affairs. Uh, I think calling him bisexual is probably an understatement. It's probably more like he was omnisexual. It was like
He
if
could put
this will
friction.
fit in that, we're
Yeah,
doing it. We're
it
gonna
was
try it.
it was very it was beyond sex. It was geometric.
Yeah. And but he had no, he made a conscious, rational decision to not have boundaries,
Yeah.
and he had a rationale for it, which we understand. It's like I said, that philosophy is called egoism,
Yeah.
which is that your ego is the fundamental driving thing in your universe. Sade actually said the only thing you can be sure about that actually exists are your own feelings,
Yeah.
feelings that your body creates. And if your body is telling you to do something and you're resisting that,
You're resisting your ultimate reality.
yeah, says what the hell is up with that?
Yeah.
He was like, no, I'm not going to live like that. All right. But on the other hand, when he was 70 years old, he was able to seduce a 14-year-old and have a 4-year affair with her before he died. So
Yeah.
it's like, obviously, there were people who were attracted
Sure.
to his, to what he was selling. And I don't think I could get away with that. But every once in a while he didn't get away with it either, and that's when he got into trouble. But
Hmm.
he obviously did get away with a lot. It's like he obviously had sex with a whole bunch of people. That
Yeah.
that was his thing, and he got away with it. It was well, he didn't actually get away with it, I guess, but it's in a certain sense he was a terrible person. But in another sense, he must have been attractive. He must have had some charisma or charm that made it possible for him
Yeah.
to convince these people that they should trust him. At one point, the police commissioner of Paris actually put out a diktat to all of the madams of the uh, houses of prostitution that they should not allow their girls to go home with Sade because of things that he had done.
The original
This,
blacklist.
yeah. So it's like, you have that on the one hand, and then, like I said, you have, his wife, who he didn't like, didn't want to marry her, but she was complicit in a lot of his crimes
Yeah.
that he's accused of, at least as far as we know. Like I said, 200-year game of telephone. We don't know exactly what happened with any of this
Yeah.
shit. But no, it seems pretty clear that she was going along with it. And uh, you know that's a story in itself that I would like to hear, but no one wrote it down.
Yeah.
So uh so basically that was the talk I was wanting to give about the Divine Marquis.
I liked it, man. I liked it. That you you talked me into it, and I agree to it, and I like no. I think the most important thing away is what it is it's a fringe case, and you cannot figure out how a system works without finding out the fringe cases.
And
And from that
Sade
point of
is
view, then he's a very
Sade is Exhibit A.
he's no different than a serial killer. He's no different than a Hitler. Like you have to, right? You have
Well,
to
he is
figure.
different from a serial killer or Hitler because he apparently never really did anything that violent.
He is, but he is not in that it's a fringe case which people don't want to look
Yeah,
at, but we have to look at. That's
right.
what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, he's not Gilderay or Jack the Ripper.
Yeah,
He isn't accused of ever having killed anybody,
yeah,
or even having tried.
yeah,
And when you look at the way he's depicted in some fictional portrayals, like I said, it's almost libelous because they're they do depict him like that, and it's like, no, it's like, yes, he was rake, he was a rake, but then he was French.
yeah. That
So
was, yeah.
this was considered normal.
That was normal.
So the most abnormal thing, the one thing he got sentenced to death for was for sodomy because he was really into anal sex, and that got him into big trouble. But he got that dealt with.
Yeah.
But uh, you know, it's like, but no one accused him of murder or anything.
Yeah.
Yes, uh, and the fact that we remember him in those terms, I think, says more about us than it does about him.
Hmm.
You know, is when we think of someone who has basically voluntarily said, "Fuck the restraints, fuck the law, fuck norms. I'm going to do what I want because this is what my body tells me to do." We all know that we have a monster inside of us too
Yeah.
that might not be so nice if we listened to it. And Sade basically was the person who said, you know what? Fuck it.
Assad didn't have a gaming stream in Hitman to play on and have everyone laugh at. If I wrote this
No.
shit down 250 years ago, they might be going, my name might be the same as this. But instead, it's a chat where we're all just giggling as I run around in a clown outfit shooting people in the head.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, and your game strategy that you described to me is just kill everybody, no matter what the
And
actual
you win.
outcome is supposed to be. Just kill all the
can't
NPCs, kill everybody.
can't miss the
That
target if everyone's dead.
Yeah. And so yeah, that is one of the reasons I wanted to tell you the stories is
Yeah,
that I do see a little bit of commonality there,
sure.
that and that's not a bad thing because this is a man who did a lot to create the modern world.
Mm.
He taught us a lot, even though it took a couple of 100 years for some of the lessons to settle in, and we really had to see someone uh, go over the
Put it to
top
work. Yeah,
to realize how right he was
yeah,
about some of the things he suggested about us. But we really don't have an excuse now for
yeah,
not understanding it.
yeah.
We should know. And that's another issue.
Um, with that, man, I'd say touche. That was a good talk. Um, but for now, we're gonna wrap this bitch up. Guys, please go in the description, grab Roger's book, Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, and we will be doing this next week. What are we doing? Papercrete? Papercrete next
Probably
week.
Papercrete, I guess. Oh, by the
Papercrete.
way, someone must have mentioned me somewhere because on after June 30th, someone, there was like a whole shitload
Yeah,
of
you said
sales
yeah, you said that.
of my book.
You got popped somewhere. You got popped somewhere. No, I'll notice that every once in a while I just
But
get a
now,
rent.
but it's hard to track down now because everybody's locking everything down because they don't want the AIs to scrape them and shit like that. So it's like, it's like, where the hell did this come from? But
You do it enough times, and I mean it happens with the podcast now. It's been around long enough with enough
mhm.
episodes that there's no reasonable way to trace back like where a subscriber comes from. It's a game of telephone. It's like, hey man, I saw you on a Reddit thread that someone screenshotted on Imgur that I saw on Telegram in Asia. And I'm like, what? What? Like, all right. But it's speciated in so many different ways. Um, guys, please go grab the book. We will be here next Sunday. Gaming stream tonight. Gonna play Hitman. Gonna go full Sade on some bitches.
I'll be
And
there.
fuck yeah. And it's 5:30 now. If I tell everyone I'll be there at 6, it means I'll probably be there between 8 and 9. So whatever. Probably between 8 and 9. Um, but yeah, Roger, great talk, man. Always love having you on. Always love Professor Roger. And I guess I'll see you in a couple hours.
Yeah, and next week.
And next week. All right, Raj. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please go grab Roger's book, support him, and yeah, thank you so much for watching. Roger, thanks for your time.